This week on The Wheelhouse, we're talking to the candidates. Jahana Hayes, George Logan in US 5. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. This is a show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. The race for Connecticut's 5th Congressional District, it's on. The 5th District spans across the western part of the state. You got parts of Fairfield, Litchfield, New Haven, Hartford counties. District currently represented by incumbent candidate Jahana Hayes. Congresswoman Hayes is running against challenger George Logan. During this hour, we're going to be talking to both candidates about where they stand on the major issues. And today's show is part of a series of interviews we're doing with candidates in our state, talking to both sides, Democrats, Republicans. We got an independent candidate coming on the show in a couple weeks for some of Connecticut's key races. Up first today, Congresswoman Jahana Hayes. Congresswoman Hayes, thank you so much.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming up to Hartford today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Good to see you in person. Thank you so much. If you got a question for Congresswoman Hayes, join the conversation, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. This is a seat that you've held now for 6 years in the 5th District. Can you highlight for me just a couple of parts of your job that you're proud of and items that you've been able to pass the last couple of years?
Well, first of all, I never imagined that I'd be doing this work, but to be able to connect so much of what I saw in my district and in my community and really solve some of those problems, I'm really proud of the work that we've done. I mean, we see big Democratic wins across the state when we see, the millions of construction jobs, $5 billion brought back to the state of Connecticut for infrastructure, for roads, bridges, highways, broadband, much of that right in the 5th, water infrastructure, our legislation on the PACT Act for our veterans, and lowering the cost of prescription drugs. Those are big wins. But then also personally, I've had my own legislation signed into law. Just yesterday, I was walking in Waterbury and there was a poster for Billy Smolinski. I had legislation passed to improve the database of a case that I had seen in my community for 20 years, these flyers. I've had legislation for veterans' mental health passed, a baby formula act, huge wins where I went in and said, I need help. This is what's going on in my district. I've had not one, but 2 wild and scenic designations to protect almost 100 miles of river in this district based on conversations that I had with people in the community who could not get these things done. I was able to go to Washington and do it.
It's been quite a time in Washington the last few years that you've been down there. It's overlapping in quite whatever the opposite of the word bipartisan is. It's been one of those situations where there's been, despite there being movement on a 30-year gun lock or deadlock on gun legislation, the House may be more divided than it's ever been. So I'm sure it's posing a challenge for you. What are you kind of doing to break the deadlock, yes, but also try to instill confidence in people in the 5th to say that you're still working despite all these challenges that you face down there?
Well, I think there's a couple parts to that. The legislation I just talked to you about, I had legislation passed under both the Biden and the Trump administration, overwhelmingly bipartisan with more than 400 people voting in support. So that takes a lot of work. That takes talking across the aisle and talking to my colleagues. So I have a proven and demonstrated record of these things. However, there are some things that are hard lines. When I introduce legislation to feed children and I can't get a Republican sponsor or co-sponsor on that, I'm not going to not try to continue feeding children because that's a target issue for them. Education. I have lots of legislation in support of public education, which is another wedge issue. So you try to, get the wins where you can. But also, I think that's why elections are so important. There are some members in the Congress who will have their seats no matter what they do, no matter how outrageous their behavior is because of gerrymandering laws. And that's why when we have the opportunity, we have to stand up. We're in a Congress right now where it's just complete chaos. We were promised that Republicans would pass clean budgets, that everything would come to the floor for a vote, and we're not seeing that. We saw speaker vote going 15 rounds for a speaker vote, and it's the most extreme members of the caucus now on both sides that are really having the loudest and the most input. So we have to have people who are willing to say, I can't support that, or I'm willing to work harder and get back to the table and get a better bill. And I think that over my 6 years in Congress, I've been able to do that, as demonstrated once again by the fact that I've been able to just pull a squeaker out and get really tough legislation passed.
Our colleague Lisa Hagan's been covering the work that you've been doing on the Farm Bill, and I know it's such a concern that you've had. And of course, not being able to get a more permanent resolution done on funding the government, because it's been such a fight down there. As you mentioned, you have the revolving door of speakers down there as well that you're dealing with. So just one more chance to just talk to people and say, like, what you can do if you get reelected to kind of try to break that deadlock on funding.
Well, the Farm Bill has been a big issue for me. I joined the Committee on Agriculture because there was no one representing small farmers like the ones that in my district. There was no one there talking about nutrition and veteran hunger and senior hunger. And these were some things that we really went back and forth. I brought the chair of the committee, G.T. Thompson, to Connecticut to hear directly from my constituents. And we really, I thought, did a great job of meeting in the middle. We worked on crop insurance. We worked on farm credit and loans, worked on updating and improving the USDA technical assistance programs. And again, right at the end, some of the most extreme members came out and said, we want to cut $30 billion from food aid. We don't want any support for, our allies in Ukraine, things like that, and tried to hold the Farm Bill hostage. So much so that they couldn't even get it to the floor on their side to get a vote for it. When we go back, I intend to keep working on that because it is too important. It's a piece of legislation that comes up every 5 years. We're already 2 years in and have had 2 extensions. But I think that the difference will be that resoundingly, this election will show that people have had enough, that they don't want to see the Republicans in control of Congress, of the House of Representatives. When we were in control, the Democrats, we passed transformational legislation with the exact same majority. So it's possible.
888-720-9677 if you'd like to ask a good question to the Congresswoman here. Congresswoman asked also the former National Teacher of the Year. So I want to dive into education a little bit. ARPA funds. We know that there's been a ton of alarm sounding over the fact that I know in Connecticut we've pretty much allocated all of our ARPA dollars now. So you have the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. That's what ARPA stands for. School officials ringing alarm bells across the state and your district saying that they're struggling to hold up these programs. We talked a lot about mental health during the pandemic, but now we're worried about whether those programs that we tried to come up with are going to stay alive. So help us understand what you can do to advocate for more dollars for education.
So I literally advocated from the very beginning to have a separate pot of educational funding because I recognized that our school districts were already operating at a deficit. They had been underfunded for so many years. So these programs that were put in place with ARPA dollars, it wasn't just that someone decided we have money to spend, let's figure out how to use it. It was because schools needed mental health support services. They needed these wraparound services. We needed to be able to fund school meals because our children were in school and hungry kids don't learn. We needed to make sure that we are improving our school infrastructure so that the HVAC systems worked and the water fountains had clean water. So these were things that needed to be done. And we had lots of federal money invested to help make those upgrades, to hire more personnel, to support students with wraparound services, to fill in some of those gaps that had been created. And now that funding is ending and school districts are ringing alarm bells. They're not saying we don't need these programs. They're saying, how are we going to fund them? So we have to have permanent funding for programs like this. We have to make sure that we are looking long term. We see plans like a Project 2025 that wants to completely eliminate the Department of Education, that wants to privatize in so many ways and have money follow the child. And my question is always, well, what happens to the children who are left behind? I represent a district that has more exclusive boarding schools than any other member of Congress, and I have schools on the Commissioner's Network of failing schools. And the equity gaps in between those is unconscionable. People say, in a kind of cliche way, the zip code where you live in shouldn't matter. Connecticut is probably the best example of that. And I'm always going to advocate for those kids because they deserve a shot. And they should be both college or career ready by the time they graduate from high school. We should have job training programs. They should be able to find jobs and be self-sufficient. And we can't do that if we keep underfunding education and not providing the resources to set them up for success.
For a show that we did here back in August, we talked to students in Hartford, and they were telling us that they don't want their federal lawmakers to worry about TikTok. They want them to worry about keeping them safe in school. New towns in the district. It's going to be 12 years since the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. 26 people died in that shooting, of course. What are your plans to better protect these kids? What are your plans to... I know we talked about that gun deadlock earlier, but obviously there's a reckoning coming on gun violence in this nation, if it's not already here.
It's long overdue. It should have happened. I thought Sandy Hook would have been the end of this conversation. I have a piece of legislation, the School Shooting Safety and Preparedness Act, which just asks us to define what a school shooting is. And my colleagues don't even want to do that because once you define it, then you have to start collecting data. The CDC has to start studying and trying to come up with solutions. They don't even want a definition of what it is. I can tell you that I understand the Second Amendment. I support gun ownership, but it should be responsible. You know, the majority of people in this country support universal background checks. They want to close some of these loopholes. They support safe storage laws. All of those things are important. And the people in this district really need to think long and hard about that. I have a challenger right now who says that he would be very, very hesitant to make any changes to existing gun laws. If we can't even have a conversation about going forward, I was in the classroom. I've been in lockdown drills. I have sat in a room with the lights off and the shades drawn with kids asking me, "Miss, what's going on?" Checking their phones to see what has happened in the surrounding area. That's not okay. And it happens in our country more than anywhere else in the world. And it's because of lack of will. We can do something to keep our kids safe and our schools. And we have to be committed to doing that.
So something else that people support, as you said, people support safe gun ownership. Something else that people support, we did a survey here at Connecticut Public, which you all filled out. Thank you so much. I think there was like 750 responses. Something people rarely care about, obviously, is reproductive rights. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022. States across the country limiting access to abortions, life-saving circumstances as well. Would you support legislation to ban or limit access to abortion care nationally? I would imagine you would not.
I would not.
Yeah.
I support a woman's right to make her own reproductive health decisions between her and her doctor. I don't think it's up to the state. Not only would I support it, but I've taken several votes in the Congress to show that support. I have signed discharge petitions to try to force votes. I've signed amicus briefs to ask for reconsideration of decisions. I can tell you after the fall of Roe, we took a vote in the Congress to protect contraceptives for women. And 195 Republicans voted no to even allowing contraceptives for women. So all of these exceptions and exclusions and it should be between a woman and her doctor. The line keeps moving, the goalpost keeps moving, but I think the fundamental idea that it's really none of my business is really where it should stand, and that's always been my position. Again, in this race, it's very important because people need to consider, in our last debate, where you moderated, my opponent said he would not vote in favor of codifying Roe, and that position has evolved and changed, and I don't trust that because that's the same thing we saw from Supreme Court justices when they were being confirmed, where they promised that they would support all these things, but their history and their record showed otherwise. And when they had the chance, they did not vote in support of codifying a woman's right over her own body.
You're catching a lot of heck for voting against, I think it's called the Halt Fentanyl Act or something like that. They're criticizing you for that. They're saying it was kind of a bipartisan effort to permanently place fentanyl-related substances as a class into a class as Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. It did pass, but just help us understand why you voted against that.
Because I read it. I voted against it because I read it. First of all, I think that anyone distributing fentanyl or highly deadly substances should be criminalized. They should have jail time. I'm a co-sponsor on bills like the Stop Fentanyl Act and the STRIPT Act, and I have worked in Congress to make sure that we are doing the best we can to stop the drugs from crossing our border, from entering our country, from killing people. This bill didn't do that. It offered no money for prevention, for treatment, for harm reduction, or even for law enforcement to enforce it. All it said was anyone caught knowingly or unknowingly possessing fentanyl, whether it was a pill or a truckload, same thing, would have mandatory minimum jail sentence. We tried to get it amended. We tried to offer amendments because I lived through the 1994 crime bill. I saw what it did to communities. The idea that we criminalized addiction. We cannot incarcerate our way out of a mental health crisis, and I've seen that happen. I saw my whole community destroyed. I bring a very different perspective to this work than the rest of the Connecticut delegation. So for all of the talk that I was the only one who voted against this, I begged people on the floor. I said, guys, let's take a look at this. Let's go back and try to get a better bill. We have other options on the table. And I was told, well, you're going to get attacked for this. You're going to get criticized because it has the word fentanyl. The optics are going to be bad. More so than optics, I care about the people who need help, who are struggling with addiction, the nurses, the teenagers who unknowingly have something laced with fentanyl that they don't even know. What this bill said was the only option is jail time for them. Mm-hmm. I want to try to save people's lives. I want to try to bring people, out of those dark places and back to life and help them get back on their feet and reenter society. And the idea that there's no difference between a teenager and a trafficker in this bill was something that I just was not willing to vote on.
I can't believe that I have to say this, but we're run out of time. I felt like it just happened so quick, Jahana. The Congresswoman Hayes came up here today. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for joining us on the Wheelhouse today.
Thanks for having me. I'd love to come back. That did go by too fast.
I know, and we're going to have you back, obviously. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Congresswoman Hayes, thank you for speaking with us. Coming up, we're going to hear from her challenger, George Logan. Have a question for George, give us a call, 888-720-9677. Thank you for listening to the Wheelhouse. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We spoke in the first segment to Congresswoman Jahana Hayes, and now we're speaking to her challenger, George Logan. George, it's so good to have you here at Connecticut Public today.
Good to be here, Frankie.
We're excited to talk about the 5th District and some of the plans that you have. I want you to tell me about yourself and why you're running for a seat in Connecticut's 5th Congressional District and why you think you're going to win this time around.
Sure. First and foremost, my goal is to make Connecticut's 5th Congressional District the best place to live, work, and raise a family. My family came here from Guatemala, and they believed in the American dream. They worked hard in factory jobs and office assistant jobs to give my siblings and I a better education and opportunity for a better job. And, I want to now help to make sure that the American dream doesn't end with me, that other folks can actually live, work, and be happy here in the 5th Congressional District. And I think we need a new voice in Congress, and I'm looking forward to winning this election and being that voice.
We talked earlier about how the 5th District encompasses parts of Fairfield, Litchfield, New Haven counties. I'm originally from the 5th District. I'm from Torrington. That's one of the towns there. Yeah. And one of the things, though, that's happened in the 5th District, I asked you about this a couple of years ago during the debate, but we do think so much about Newtown and Sandy Hook in that district, the elementary school shooting there. Just want to help get a sense from you of what you're trying to do to protect 6-7-year-olds in the classroom, people from gun violence. Give me an idea of what you want to do to protect people from gun violence.
Yeah, I absolutely believe in gun control and good gun control laws. In my time as a state senator, I voted in favor of the ghost gun bill to make sure that all guns had serial numbers and registered. Ethan's Law, in terms of safe storage of firearms in the home, and education, right, on firearm safety is important. Now, as I'm running for Congress, there is the link with the open borders, right? You take a look at the open borders that we have, and we've got illegal drugs and human trafficking, but over 500,000 illegal guns. Guns are coming across the border, and they're coming into all our neighborhoods. So for me, as a Congressperson, I would want to secure the border.
Here in Connecticut, can we,
Yes.
or even nationwide, can we ban assault rifles, for instance? Is that one thing that we could do here to make sure that people in the country that already live here can't get assault weapons? Do you think that's something that we should do?
Right. So here in Connecticut, right, we have some of the most restrictive gun laws in all of the country.
Yes.
Here in Connecticut, which your focus is Connecticut, right, and the fifth. Here in Connecticut, just like 90% of folks that are charged with gun crimes, 90% are either nullified or thrown out. Right? We need to enforce the gun laws that we have here in Connecticut, and we need to give our law enforcement the ability to and the resources to do that.
Can we have a federal assault ban? Would you support a federal assault weapons ban?
What I want to support, right, is the illegal gun task force, right, to get illegal guns off the streets here in Connecticut. Here in Connecticut, we already, have that ban. We already have those restrictions. So here in Connecticut, here in the 5th Congressional District, we need to do more to support our law enforcement. And as a God willing, future congressman, I want to make sure that those resources are brought here to Connecticut so we can enforce the laws we have on the books and we can get illegal guns off our streets.
We surveyed our listeners. I can't speak this morning, but thankfully George can and the Congresswoman can. But we surveyed our listeners on some of the most pressing issues that are out there right now. One of the top 5 was reproductive rights.
Yes.
So just want to give you an opportunity to talk about what's happened since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. If your position is evolving on that, would you? I think a lot of questions of Republicans now. People want to know if you would support like a national abortion ban or maybe like a 6-week timetable, something like that. What are your thoughts on reproductive rights?
Sure. One, I would not support a national abortion ban. And I've been very consistent in terms of my support of a woman's right to choose. As a state senator, I received a 100% voting record from NARAL regarding supporting women's reproductive rights issues. I have been extremely supportive. And at the federal level, I would codify a woman's right to choose as long as it doesn't undermine Connecticut state law and is constitutional. And that has been my longtime position on that issue.
I think the words that Congresswoman used earlier was not getting in between a woman's right to choose and her or at least the conversation that she has with her doctor, right? So when we figure out state laws, we're in Connecticut,
Yes.
right? We don't have to worry about Connecticut getting in the way of what's happening between a person and their doctor. But are you concerned about other states doing that? Like a Texas or something like that?
Yeah, so my focus, right, is to, one, support women's reproductive rights issues, including IVF, for example. And I want to do everything possible in Washington to support women's right to choose, again, as long as it doesn't undermine Connecticut state law and it's constitutional. Here in Connecticut, you mentioned my opponent. In Connecticut, late-term abortion, right, is something that is restricted in terms of as long as it's something that doesn't put the woman's, the mother's life or health in danger. And that's, I believe, consistent with what I would want to do in Washington. I want to make sure that, Connecticut voters have decided, right, our abortion law, I think, is an excellent in terms of supporting women's reproductive rights. And I want to support that at the national level.
You and I are both the children of immigrants.
Yes.
My family comes from Italia. Your family comes from Jamaica, from Guatemala. Your dad's family comes by way of Jamaica.
And Nicaragua as well.
And Nicaragua as well.
I'm a mother's side, yes. Yeah.
Yes. So families come here legally, obviously, but there's been this conflation that's happening at the national level. There's people that are in Springfield, Ohio, for example. I think they come from Haiti, but they're coming legally, it sounds like. Do you get upset when a J.D. Vance or a Donald Trump kind of conflates illegal immigration with legal immigration? Does that bother you as a child of immigrants?
I support legal immigration. I believe our open borders and illegal immigration, hurts legal immigration system. I do believe that immigration system needs to be fixed. But in order to do that, first, we need to secure our borders, whether it's our southern borders, and now we're hearing the northern border, right, where we have some New England states that border Canada. Is also becoming porous as well. It's important that we secure our borders. It's important that we reform our immigration system. We need to do that in, I think, a respectful and proper way. Immigrants have been the fabric of this country from the beginning, and it will continue to be. So I will do everything possible to support our legal immigration system and to help to reform it.
If elected, can you get some, or would you want some momentum behind what was happening in the Senate, where they were trying to pass a bill? I think James Lankford was working in a bipartisan effort with a couple of Democratic senators. And I apologize if I have that wrong. I'm doing that off the top of my head. But I know there was this bipartisan effort to try to get some kind of plan in place to fix our broken immigration system nationally. So is that something you would support as a Republican? Would you want to see something like that come into play, where both Republicans and Democrats are working to fix the immigration system?
It is always better, right, to fix our common problems in a bipartisan manner. I had a 97% bipartisan voting record in the state Senate. And in Congress, I too would be looking for a bipartisan support to fix our immigration system. And certainly, I'm going to work with folks on the other side of the aisle, and we have to have cooperation, obviously, from the U.S. Senate as well to do that. So yes, I absolutely would be looking for a bipartisan solution to fix our immigration problem.
I think people might define you, if they were to put you in a box, they'd look at you as more of like a moderate Republican. I think they could separate you from some of the national rhetoric that we're seeing. Certainly, your abortion stance here today is much different than we see at a national level. So help me understand, if you win the election, can constituents in the 5th District expect you to push back against your own party when you don't agree with them, push back against a Donald Trump if he were to be elected, and maybe you were elected as well? Could you push back?
The voters in the 5th Congressional District can rest assured that I will push back on any bad policies, any bad bills that are proposed that are going to hurt the people of the 5th Congressional District, regardless of who's proposing them or from which party. And they can expect me to work hard and vigorously fight to make sure that we do everything possible for folks in the 5th Congressional District to live, work, and raise their family here. My goal is not to go to Washington to push the agenda of any particular political party. My goal is to focus on those issues that are going to impact the families in the 5th Congressional District, and we have a great opportunity here to do that. I believe that my opponent, with her 99% voting record with the administration in the White House, has led to the high inflation, the open borders, and even our place around the world, right, has been exponentially weakened. Is weaker than it was. We need, I believe, a different voice down in Washington, one that's truly, I have a track record of working in a bipartisan manner, and I expect to fully do that in Washington.
What do you say to, you live in like this purple district, you're trying to represent this purple district here. So what do you say to people that might be on the other side of the aisle if they're considering to vote for you, if you support a President Trump? What can you say to them? Would you vote for Donald Trump? And then I guess, what would you say to them if they're concerned that you support Donald Trump? Because it is like a purple district.
Sure. I mean, I've also been very consistent in that I plan on voting for the Republican presidential ticket. I've said that clearly. I cannot in good conscience support 4 more years of Bidenomics, 4 more years of high inflation, 4 more years of an open border. And, we've heard from the administration, we've heard from the vice president that she wouldn't have changed anything that she's done in the last 4 years, right? And so my opponent is supporting the administration in Washington and continue. They want bigger and more government. I believe I want to reduce taxes. I want to put more money in people's pockets. I want to help bring down the cost of groceries and gasoline. And I think we can do that with better leadership in Washington.
A lot of the fight that's happening in the House is over military aid and how much we should be giving to allies overseas. So if you enter the fray and you get elected, this is something that you're going to be a part of now. You're going to have this situation where we're consistently, it seems like, trying to find a temporary resolution for spending rather than a permanent one. So where are your thoughts on giving money to Ukraine, Israel? Should we be continuing to support both countries in their wars financially? What are your thoughts?
I believe it's very important for the United States to support their allies, right? Support Israel. Israel has a right to defend itself. And, we have Iran here fighting a proxy war through these various terrorist organizations and groups. And I think it's important that we continue to provide resources to help Israel defend itself. And when it comes to Ukraine, that unprovoked invasion from Russia and from Putin, that needs to stop, and it needs to be pushed back. And I absolutely support funding, to help Ukraine fight their own, their war. And when you look across the world, whether it's China or North Korea, I believe in peace through strength, right? Strength of our economy, strength of our military, and strength in our convictions and commitment to freedom. That is extremely important. And I think right now, because of the lack of, that's just a failed foreign policy coming out of Washington, it has put us in a weaker state across the world. And I think we're seeing a lot of the results of that from emboldening our enemies to do things that I think, we need to make sure that we push back on in a strong and forceful way.
I want to acknowledge the tough time that some folks that are Jewish are feeling at this time. And you mentioned Israel. And obviously you come up on that 1-year marker of the hostages that were taken. But I also want to recognize the Gazans that have died, tens of thousands of civilians. And you talked about the war with Iran. But you also had a situation where we had our great show that we have, Where We Live, hosted by Kat Shen, recently had some Lebanese folks that live in the area,
sure,
of course, in your district as well.
Yes, absolutely.
That people are dying now as a result of what's happening with Israel. So can you reach out to Gazans, Lebanese, folks that are out there that are dying now at the hands of this war that's continuing overseas?
There are great and wonderful people in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. War is terrible, and I want the war to end as quickly as possible. I believe in a two-state solution with Israel, but we can't have the other side run by terrorists, and that is a huge problem and issue. So, yeah, absolutely. We need to do everything possible to help Israel to defend itself and to rid themselves of the terrorists that are threatening their country, every day. And we need to make sure that we do everything possible. And I will support the two-state solution, again, as long as the other side isn't run by a group of a terrorist organization.
Less than a minute left here. Just help me understand why folks should get out there and vote for you.
Because it is time for a change. Folks are hurting and they're tired of the status quo. Really, this campaign is about whether you want more of the same or you believe we need a new voice in Congress. I want to be that new voice. I've got a track record, and I believe that we can make the 5th Congressional District the best place for people to live, work, and raise a family.
The choice for congressperson in the 5th District is between George Logan and Jahana Hayes. Thank you so much, George, for coming on the show today. I appreciate it.
Frank,
you take care.
It. Take care now.
Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, if you want to help us analyze what just happened on the show. Great speaking with George Logan today. Coming up, we're going to unpack what we just heard from both candidates with Lisa Hagan, Connecticut Mirror and Connecticut Public's shared federal policy reporter, and Livy Stanford, reporter at the Republican American. You got a question about what you just heard, give us a call, 888-720-9677. This is The Wheelhouse. From Connecticut Public Radio, I'm Frankie Graziano. We've been talking to Connecticut candidates for Connecticut's 5th Congressional District, the incumbent Democrat, Congresswoman Jahana Hayes, and Republican opponent, George Logan. And now we're going to unpack some of what was just said with an expert panel, joined now by Livy Stanford, back on The Wheelhouse. She helped us do this during the municipals last year. Livy, thank you so much for joining us. She is a city reporter for the Republican American.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. I want to ask you first if you have any kind of reaction to what you just heard.
It's been interesting. It seems that they're both talking about the issues that they've talked about during the campaign. What I found interesting is Mr. Logan didn't say one way or another whether he would support the federal assault weapons ban. I know you asked him about that. And he further clarified his position on abortion, which I think has been one of the biggest issues in this race. And I think it will be one of the main issues that happens with this race.
Also joining us on our excerpt panel today, Lisa Hagan, our Connecticut Mirror and Connecticut Public shared federal policy reporter. And Lisa, I just want to say, I don't think you've stopped covering this race since the last one ended. Is that correct?
It feels like we're just living in a constant cycle. So the last 2 years have flown by, and here we are with the rematch.
If we got time, maybe we should talk about whether or not we should be doing this every 2 years, because I see that this might be taking, she looks great. I saw her today. She looks amazing. I don't know what it's like to, I was asking her before, what's it like to run against somebody every 2 years, something like that? It's got to be killing these Congress people.
And a lot of money, too.
And a lot of money, too. Speaking of, how's the money looking in this race? I know you've been tracking it. How are each candidates doing?
I gave it a quick look because they kind of came out with one of the final fundraising reports for the race. And so over the last 3 months, it's been a bit more of the same. Congresswoman Hayes has raised more. I think she raised about $1 million over the last 3 months. George Logan pulling in higher numbers too. I think 700, 800,000. So, I mean, she is outpacing him on the money, but at the same time, there's a lot of money coming in from outside groups, from super PACs, from Washington. So they both have plenty of money to be spending on the airwaves, and they are. And so that's other than the debate that we saw last week, forums and interviews like today, a lot of this is being played out on the airwaves, and they both have a lot of money to make their case.
I got to jump back to something that I just forgot to ask you. I wanted to make sure I got your reactions to what you just saw there. Is this kind of similar to what Livy saw, or anything else you want to point out? What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. They're hitting the same notes and issues that they've both been talking about. It was obviously a bit of a different tenor and tone than the debate because they weren't, in the same room. I think doing a little less contrasting, a little more focused on both, her record in Congress for the past 6 years. George Logan talked a little bit more about his voting record in the state Senate. I think the one thing that I was hoping to see a bit more was some clarity on where he stands on certain federal legislation if he were to come to Congress. And so at the debate, he sounded pretty critical of the bipartisan border bill. I didn't really hear, at least in this interview, where he maybe stood on that. He said he wanted a bipartisan solution for immigration. So I'm curious what exactly that would look like. And maybe he would want something that mirrors what it looks like in Congress. But at least in the debate, he sounded pretty critical of it. And I was hoping he would speak more to maybe his evolution on abortion rights, because you moderated the debate where he spoke about at the time, at least 2 years ago, not supporting federal legislation to codify Roe. And it sounds like now he does, with some caveats. And so I was curious to hear a little bit more, and I'm hoping to get more clarity on maybe how he's come to a little bit of a change of position since the last 2 years.
Yeah, it sounded like he said that he wants to make sure that people's lives are protected in other states if it comes down to that. But the reality is that's not happening in places like Texas. On your point, you made a great point there about the border bill. I think that was more of a user error. I don't think I asked him the question strong enough. I wish I could have that back, because you'd like to challenge him to get a little better of an answer there. But he does seem to have a bit of a stronger stance on reproductive rights than some of the other candidates we've talked to so far that come from the Republican side of the aisle. But is it close enough to bridge a 2,000 vote gap, Lisa Hagan?
That's the $1 million question. And I mean, we saw that poll come out yesterday that showed it. It's a really tight race yet again. And so, I think when they're on the campaign trail, they're talking about what they think are their strong suits. He talks a lot about immigration. He talks a lot about the economy and cost of living. And so I imagine, hoping to hit the campaign trail with both of them next week when I'm back up in Connecticut. And so curious to see in the final stretch of the race, what are the issues that they're most focused on, and closing that gap.
Good news that Lisa Hagan's coming back to Connecticut soon. We're going to be excited to see her when she gets up here. Speaking of the close race, Livy, in following this, it sounds like you talked to a scholar that kind of had advice for both of these candidates on how to win.
Yes, Gary Rose spoke a lot. He's a scholar at Sacred Heart University, spoke about the importance of Representative Hayes really talking about her record and continuing to talk about the things that she's done in her district. and why she should be reelected. And then when it comes to Mr. Logan, the real question is, why do we need a change? And that it's really important that he explain why there should be a change in the 5th District, and that if he can't get that out, then it would be hard for him to win. So these are the defining areas. And another professor at Connecticut State University I spoke to talked about how important unaffiliated voters are in this election. They really may decide this election. And now with the presidential election, you're going to have more voters out this time than the last time there was this election between these two.
I think what Livy's kind of getting there is an important thing, Lisa, is that George Logan kind of positions himself as like a more moderate candidate, at least publicly. So the outcome of the presidential election, is that going to impact how difficult it is for somebody like George Logan to critique his own party if he does win?
I think that's one of the biggest differences from when he was running 2 years ago, was that in 2022, it was a midterm year. There was a gubernatorial race. So, I mean, that was the top of the ticket at the time. And so, I mean, that plays into it as well. But a presidential is a different ballgame. President Biden and other Democratic presidential candidates have won pretty handily in Connecticut. We did see, though, that poll yesterday showed, at least in the 5th District, a really tight race between Harris and Trump, at least when it comes to Connecticut's 5th District. But I mean, there's always the top of the ticket that can kind of play into local races down ballot, though they are both more known quantities than they have been. This would be her 4th term she's running in. He has been a state senator, and he is now running for a 2nd time around. And so they do have more name ID, but, the presidential race will obviously have a pretty, I think, profound impact on what happens.
Some rural towns and at least more suburban areas in that district that make it more unique and make it more of a situation where you can have turnout in some of those places like Newtown and Southbury, where it might have been not as bad last time around, but you don't turn out people in Waterbury or even Torrington or some of the other bigger towns in that district. So I imagine that's going to be a big thing. Would that be more of a boon for Jahana Hayes if more people come out and vote?
I think it might be. I think the defining rule here is how many people get out to vote. I know that there are several drives already in Waterbury, Souls to the Polls they're having at Grace Baptist Church coming up to try to get more people out to vote. And that's going to be huge, is the vote, how many people come out. Because you even saw in the mayoral race between now Mayor Paul Penarewski and Don Morano, she only lost by 571 votes. So I think those who come out to the polls, it's going to be critical how many come out in this race.
Reproductive rights, a major issue in this one. I think you mentioned earlier that you got a position from him. Do you feel like you have a clear idea on where both candidates stand on this?
Again, I think his position, Mr. Logan's position, has really evolved. Like from 2022, he said he would not vote to codify Roe v. Wade. And now he said to our paper that he would support codifying a woman's right to choose into federal law as long as it doesn't infringe on Connecticut law and constitutional law. So I do feel that his position has evolved, but like Lisa, I'd like to know more how that's evolved over the last 2 years, because he did have a different thought in that debate 2 years ago when he addressed that issue.
Key question there is always going to be, what is your stance on what happens between the person that's considering this abortion care and the doctor? I think that's always going to be the question to follow along. So we'll see if we have more opportunities or other publications will do that as well. We got a caller on the line. I want Lisa to listen to this question. George Logan was just on here talking about Bidenomics. Matthew from Simsbury says, Matthew, what'd you think about that comment?
It's interesting. I think he's just being disingenuous. Some people just don't get all the information. They can't make the correct decision without it. He's just kind of perpetuating that cycle. By every measure, the economy of the United States is performing better than any other economy in the world. It's recovered faster because of the policies of the current administration, these facts are undeniable. So, the idea that people are sick of what's been going on in the last 4 years, I don't think they even know what's been going on in the last 4 years. It's kind of a bigger problem than we tend to mention. We talk more about sports than we do about what's actually happening in the world around us. And to me, that's scary.
Matthew, I sense your frustration because, thank you for the call, Matthew. Lisa, when I watched the debate that happened recently, not the debate that we did a couple years ago on Connecticut Public, go find that in the archives if you can. But when you saw this recent debate, Dan Haar asked the question about the economy, and it was maybe only about 3 points that he made, but it seemed like a laundry list of things that were going well with the economy. Do you get that same sense that the Biden team and the White House thinks that Americans should know that things are going pretty well, despite what George Logan says, despite what some Republican lawmakers are saying?
I think that's one of the big kind of things they're grappling with in this election, the Biden administration and then also Democrats, is that there seems to be a disconnect on what is happening in the economy and how people are feeling. And so, they talked about that in the 5th district debate. As I listened to the 2nd Congressional district debate too. And they were making kind of the same points where, unemployment is lower, there is rising wages, but people are still, inflation is down, but people are still hurting and struggling to afford homes, to find homes, to afford groceries and gas. And so there's that disconnect. And so, I think that's the hardest part, for Democrats right now, is to try to say, things are looking better and we've done X, Y, and Z policies, but, address the fact that voters and people are still hurting and having a really hard time. Republicans need to try to offer some solutions or try to explain what they're going to do to help with rising costs. And, I'm curious to see maybe some more specifics from George Logan and how he would want to address that at the federal level.
That's been something that both candidates are trying to weave, that fine line that Lisa's talking about, where you could say things are going well, but if I'm spending $25 on a Happy Meal and all this stuff at McDonald's for my family, this meal that might have cost $15 a couple of years ago, people are still going to be mad. They're going to be upset. So it's kind of a line that people have to weave. Only got about 30 seconds left here or so. Lisa just talked about some things that the candidates should be looking forward to as we end here. Livy, what are you looking forward to here? What do the candidates need to either do before this race finishes up, or what are some efforts you're looking to in the area that you're working in Waterbury that people will try to do to get out the vote?
Again, I think continued drives to get out the vote. I think the issues are, again, abortion is the main issue. I think the immigration remains a big issue, the economy, and how they tackle each of these issues is going to be really defining in the final weeks. I know Representative Hayes has said often that she is in her district, she lives in her district, she worships in her district, and that's what differentiates her, and that she's not a perennial candidate. And so Mr. Logan, again, is the challenge of how he can differentiate himself.
Livy Stanford, reporter for the Republican American. Great to have you back on the Wheelhouse. Thank you, Livy.
Thank you.
Good luck covering the rest of that race. You know who's going to be covering the rest of that race as well? Lisa Hagen. She never stopped covering the race. She's doing a great job for the Connecticut Mirror and Connecticut Public. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Frankie. Always good to be here.
This was our third of 5 candidate interviews. We're going to hear from candidates for Connecticut's 4th Congressional District on Wednesday, October 23rd. Today's show produced by Chloe Wynn, edited by Robin Doyen-Aiken. Technical producer is the maestro, Dylan Reyes. Joe Koss and Bradley O'Connor manage our live stream. Graphics for our live stream, ooh, they look beautiful. Sam Hockaday. Thanks to Tess Terrible and Megan Boone for helping us in studio today. Meg Dalton oversees the production of The Wheelhouse. Thank you also to Julianne Veracci, Meg Fitzgerald. Download The Wheelhouse anytime. I'm Frankie Graziano.